So we are going to get started. Just want to thank everyone for joining us for our inaugural Temple University 3-minute thesis competition. This is the first ever university-wide 3-minute thesis competition that we're having at Temple University, and we are glad that each of you can participate in it, as well as we are going to get to hear from some really amazing speakers today and look forward to hearing all of their presentations. My name is Mark Coloco, and I am the Senior Career Coach at the Temple University Career Center, where I work with specifically graduate students towards their professional development, whether they are pursuing academic career paths or other professional career paths. I also get a chance to support our undergraduate students who are considering graduate school. I will actually be your event host for today, and I look forward to just kind of sharing a little bit about what this event will include and kind of ushering us through the beginning of this particular program. So once again, thank you all for joining us. So let's begin with just the agenda and what we will cover through today's program. I will share an overview of the Temple University 3-minute competition, as well as give some context and some background to the 3-minute thesis competition that was founded by the University of Queensland. Then I will introduce our judging panel, as well as our moderator. Our moderator today is Ms. Christina Owings, who is an assistant professor of practice in the Fox School of Business, and I'll get a chance to introduce her a little bit later. Then we are going to actually have presentations from 12 doctoral students in the schools and colleges. So we have several students who have been selected by their colleges to represent them in this particular competition, and we look forward to hearing each of their presentations as they talk about their doctoral research. After we hear all of their presentations, we will go into a judging process, and we'll explain a little bit of what that will involve. There are actually 3 awards that students will be competing for today: a first prize award, a second prize award, and also the People's Choice. So you all get a chance to actually vote and actually say who you thought had the best presentation today. And so we'll explain the process of how that will look in just a little bit. We also are going to have a debrief activity. So after the presentations and while the judging is happening, our judging panel is actually going to go into a separate room, and they're actually going to deliberate and decide who the first prize and second prize award winners are. We're actually going to have a little bit of an activity where the students can actually share about their experience in preparing for this competition, and that will be facilitated by Dr. Crystal Austin, who is the Assistant Professor of Instruction in the College of Education and Human Development. So after the debrief activity that we have, then there will be the announcement of the winners. And there will be, again, a first prize winner, a second prize winner, and a People's Choice Award winner. And so that will be the overall flow of our program. And now I'm going to share just a little bit about the 3-minute thesis competition more broadly. So the 3-minute thesis competition has been around for some time. It started and was founded in the University of Queensland, and they really had a very brilliant idea that they wanted to create an experience for doctoral students where they could actually practice communicating their research to a broader audience. If you think about it, doctoral students spend a lot of time with their chairs, with their faculty, communicating to others about the complexities of their work, but they won't just be working with those individuals for the rest of their careers. They're going to have many situations where they are talking to people who are outside of their field. So the University of Queensland really wanted to create an experience where these students could practice communicating their research to a very broad audience, to communicating to someone that wouldn't be in their field, maybe even being able to communicate their work to friends and family. So I think they can be valuable for that as well. And so this particular competition has gone on for a number of years. And since 2008, you can see that the 3MT concept has been very popular, that it is actually a competition that happens in over 900 universities across 85 countries worldwide. So it is a very popular event, a very popular competition. And we're actually very excited here at Temple University to actually bring in this event to our institution and that students can participate in. So we will now talk a little bit about the rules for the 3-minute thesis competition. So for the 3-minute thesis competition, let's highlight some of the main kind of rules. So each presenter actually has one slide, and there can't be any animation or movement in that particular slide, only one slide to be able to present. And one of the key things to keep in mind is that our presenters must keep their talk to 3 minutes. It has to be a very concise presentation. They can't go exceedingly over that 3-minute time period. And then our judges will be, again, deciding who the first prize and the second prize award winners are. In addition to that, there cannot be any electronic media, there can't be any use of props, there can't be any spoken word as well. It's just a clean, clear presentation that must be 3 minutes using one slide. So those are some of the basic rules for the 3-minute thesis competition. And there's actually some judging criteria that you will want to keep in mind as we kind of get ready to go through these different presentations today. So there are two main criteria that we will need to be focusing on. And this first one is the comprehension and content. And I like to think of this as the what someone is saying when they are presenting. So when someone is presenting, we're going to be looking for, from our speakers today, are they breaking down and making clear academic jargon? There are a lot of very complex terms in all the different fields that are represented today. And we would like our presenters to be able to communicate in the most clear way what their topic is. So we'll be looking to see, can they actually break down their content into clear, kind of discernible parts. We also want to see a logical and clear sequence, that their presentation has a very good flow that is able to be kind of understood. We want to make sure that that these presentations, that if they're communicating any results, that they're clearly bringing that across as well. But basically, it's about, can we understand the presentation that we've heard today? So this first area that we'll be considering is the comprehension and content, the what. Can we understand what our presenters have communicated? The other area that we'll be looking at is engagement and communication. I like to think of this as the how. It's how they communicate their particular message. And does the presentation make us want to learn more? Is there a lot of enthusiasm that is communicated in the particular research? Does the person, even in this virtual setup, are they able to use good vocal range? Are they able to kind of really make us make the presentation relatable to the particular audience? So when it comes to engagement and communication, please look for these things to see, is the presentation relatable? Is the presentation something that invites you to kind of learn more as you're kind of going through? So these are our criteria that you will want to consider. And again, each of our speakers today, they're going to be competing for 3 prizes, 3 scholarship awards that have been offered by the graduate school. Very grateful for the sponsorship of the graduate school for these 3 particular awards. And then they will be processed through Student Financial Services. Our winners will be able to receive more information about this following the program. But there are 3 scholarships that students will be competing for today. The first prize award is for $1,000. So this is the top presentation. Then the second prize award, second place award, will be for $500. And then the People's Choice Award will also be for $500. The first 2 awards, the first prize and the second prize award, will be actually decided by our judging panel, but then the People's Choice Award will be decided by the broader group today. So these are our 3 awards. And again, thank you to the graduate school for sponsoring and for providing these scholarships for our students. So now I want to introduce our judging panel. We are very fortunate to be able to have 4 judges for today's event. So we have Jim Cowley, who is the Vice President of Institutional Advancement, who will be one of our judges. We also have Dr. Carrie Milch, who is the Assistant Director for Undergraduate Enrichment and Undergraduate Studies, who will also be one of our judges. We also have Chris Stein, who is a Marketing Manager in Strategic Marketing and Communication. And lastly, we have V. Lynette Mitchell, who is the Director of Finance in the Division of Student Affairs. We thank each of our judges. You might not be able to see them now, but they are present with us, and they will be going into a separate room after all the presentations today to decide who our first prize and second prize winners are. So thank you, and you'll be able to hear what they thought later today. And now I would like to actually transition it over to our event moderator. So our event moderator is actually going to introduce each of our different speakers and kind of transition us through all of the presentations. And I'm happy to introduce Christina Owings, who is the Assistant Professor of Practice at the Fox School of Business. And Christina, actually prior to being a faculty member, actually was a communication consultant for many high-level executives and helping them with their professional communication. And now within the Fox School of Business, she works with doctoral students, assisting them with their professional communication and helping them to communicate their work to a broader audience. So I'm very excited to introduce my colleague, Ms. Christina Owings, and I will now be handing the program off to her.
Thank you so much, Mark, for your warm welcome. I'm really excited to be here today. Some of you already know me, and you know that I am passionate about how we communicate our information. And the 3-minute thesis competition allows us as a broad audience to gain perspective and understand all of the hard work that our presenters have been doing. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to understand their research and for them to have a chance to communicate it with us, a broad and warmly receptive audience. So we're very happy to have our presenters today, and you'll see how much hard work they've been doing. So to not waste time and to get right to what everybody is here for, I would like to introduce our first presenter. Our first presenter's name is Justin Braveboy Wagner. He's coming to us from the College of Engineering. His discipline is bioengineering. And his presentation today is titled Understanding and Preserving Healthy Bone in Partial Gravity. And so with that being said, I'd like to turn it over to Justin.
Hi there, hope everyone can hear me. Let me start now. Last month, we celebrated the birthday and achievements of Yuri Gagarin, the cosmonaut. He was the first human being to orbit the Earth. He didn't know it at the time, but those who followed him into space soon discovered a problem any space tourist or space worker will have to deal with: bone loss. Just like osteoporosis, up to 2% bone mass in just 1 month on the space station. Weaker bones can lead to increased risk of injury, not to mention a loss of quality of life when you return to Earth. Why is this though? Well, think of bone like a perpetual construction site. You've got builders that put down new material and remodelers that remove the old material. These builders are osteoblasts. These are the blue guys with the hard hats. And the remodelers are osteoclasts. These are the red guys with the pickaxes. They're talking to each other in what we call molecular crosstalk, or signaling, telling each other to do this or do that, do more or do less. Like a cellular yin and yang, we call this homeostasis. In Earth gravity, there's a natural balance. But in space, the system is out of balance. There's too much remodeling, too little bone building. Before you know it, you're losing bone mass. Okay, but are these effects the same on Mars or the moon? They have some gravity, but not a lot. 1/3 for Mars, 1/10 for the moon. And can we counter this and protect ourselves? The bottom left shows a human gyroscope. It's used to prepare astronauts for spaceflight. You can use something similar to test microgravity for hours or days on end. It's called an RPM, or random positioning machine. That's exactly what we did. So we looked at 3 things. 1, genes activating. 2, cells making bone mineral. And 3, cells maturing. So genes can turn on and off and result in different amounts of protein being made and different signals being sent to other cells. Maturation, think of it as a change in phenotype, like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. You have the same creature, same genotype, but different phenotype. And our cellular caterpillars have to mature to do their jobs. Investigating these gravities, I saw 2 different patterns emerge. The first pattern was a linear gradient for mineralization and maturation. This means that lower gravity resulted in more inhibition of function. Second pattern for gene expression was a threshold. This means expression cut off abruptly between Earth and Mars gravity, and Mars was about the same as microgravity. I characterized these differences, turned them into a predictive model. Then I looked into ways to mitigate these effects. First was with a nutrient like curcumin here from turmeric, energizes the cells. I tested phytonutrients from plants for this and found interesting synergistic reactions. Then I tested a signaling pathway, Rho-ROCK, that's responsible for cell remodeling in response to the environment. By knocking it out, I preserved the cells and prevented them from self-destructively reacting to the change in gravity. I think my work will contribute to space research and should be useful as we look forward to becoming, sometime this century, an interplanetary species. End.
Great, thank you so much, Justin. Very interesting, and a great example of how research will help us discover more things in the future. So wonderful to hear from you. Thank you very much. Next, we'll move right along to Robert McMahon. He is coming to us from Klein College of Media and Communication with his discipline in media and communication. His presentation today is titled Selling Surveillance in the Media.
Good afternoon. To begin, I would like to paint a picture. Consider the following scenarios. A stranger stands outside of your home and stares through the window at you. Another stranger sits in your car while you drive. Others follow you around wherever you go. One even stands in the corner of your bedroom. They are present 24 hours a day, monitoring and recording your activities, from the banal to the most intimate, communicating with their co-conspirators, formulating opinions, and drawing conclusions about you. Now, you would probably call the police as soon as you saw someone staring through your window. Yet, how is it that we allow the technological equivalent to occur today? The answer to this question is what I'm investigating in this dissertation. It is built upon layers of concepts which I use to unmask how the public is persuaded to let this happen. First, the ideologies of capitalism and surveillance have met and formed a union known as surveillance capitalism. Surveillance capitalism interconnects surveillance, human behavior, and capitalism together as a powerful market force that is tapping into a new source of capital, the digital data that we all generate in a connected society. Now, this market force is manifested in some very visible consumer products you might even own, like a fitness tracker, a personal assistant, a video doorbell, or any technology that is labeled as smart. These are very much like the oil rigs used to drill for oil, but these drill for data. Next is examining how media sells these surveillance products. This is important because media has a remarkable influence on society. It shapes public attitudes and is used to provide the justification for the lurking digital stranger. In this dissertation, I will examine nearly 300 articles about these types of products across a range of journalistic outlets, plus product websites and promotional videos. By analyzing how they're talked about, we can learn how surveillance is sold. In other words, how is that digital stranger made appealing to you? My early analysis suggests there are 4 themes used in the media to sell surveillance: fear, convenience, citizenship, and inevitability. This research brings together a critical interrogation of the interlocking relationship between capitalism and surveillance to really reveal the ideological work exercised to erode your personal privacy and democratic ideals through the use of media products. It is my hope that this project will help the public better understand how they are convinced into allowing a digital stranger in their lives and advance the conversation about this topic in the broader field of surveillance studies by adding the media analysis component, which is often overlooked. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. Very interesting and fascinating to hear about how research is applied to real life and in a way that impacts all of us. So we appreciate your hard work in this area. Thank you so much. Next, we're going to hear from Melissa Betters. She's coming from the College of Science and Technology. Her discipline is biology, and her presentation is titled Investigating Deep Sea Snail Species at Chemosynthetic Environments. So I'd like to turn it over to Melissa whenever you're ready.
Thank you. So my first dive to the bottom of the ocean was in 2017. I was on a research cruise in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, miles away from the nearest land. That morning, the sub-pilot, another researcher, and myself climbed into the submarine and descended to the ocean floor. To me, it was like landing on another planet, but it wasn't for the sub-pilot. In fact, he was able to tell us what almost everything we saw was. And what's more, he was able to identify if something was new or interesting about what we were seeing. Like he'd never seen that fish this deep before, or he didn't know that coral lived on this seamount. And it became clear to me that his ability to recognize these species is what gave him the foundational knowledge to make these interesting observations. The process of identifying species is a branch of biology known as taxonomy. and it's now what I do. I work in a very particular environment in the deep ocean, known as chemosynthetic environments. At these environments, tiny organisms are able to create food and energy directly from chemicals released from the ocean floor, meaning these are some of the only organisms on Earth that don't rely on sunlight for their food. These tiny organisms coat the hard surfaces at these sites, and the animals I now study, the snails, eat them. So I look to identify the huge diversity of snails at these sites. The problem being they are very hard to get to. So how do I actually find new species to identify? We could just scour the ocean floor and hope to find something new, but of course that would take a huge amount of time and effort. A better way is to predict where new species are most likely to be and to look there. On land, for instance, organisms on either side of a river or a mountain range will most likely be different species, particularly if those organisms struggle to cross those barriers. Identifying barriers like this in the ocean, though, is pretty difficult. So I look to identify what barriers actually do exist. Is water depth a barrier that animals can't cross? How about the concentration of dissolved chemicals or temperature? I study snails on either side of these barriers, and by comparing their DNA, I can tell whether these barriers may be driving these organisms apart or have some time in the past. This provides myself and others with a blueprint on where to look for new species in the oceans. Documenting the vast diversity of life in our oceans is daunting, but this at least gives us a place to start. Plus, the more we can tell about marine species, the better equipped we'll be to protect and manage them for decades to come. Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa. That was great. Very nice and very interesting. I wanted to make a comment about all our presentations. If you notice, the students have not let this virtual format take away from their energy at all. Every presentation shows their passion, and even though this was originally planned for a stage in a live face-to-face environment, our students are doing a great job with this virtual environment, and it's easy to see how passionate they are about their research. So just a quick comment there. We'll continue now with Grace Cooper. Grace comes to us from the College of Liberal Arts, focus on anthropology. And the presentation today is titled Networks of Care in Philadelphia. So I'd like to turn it over to Grace.
Thank you. During the pandemic, are you thinking more about our healthcare system? And do you ever think that it isn't working? Or perhaps you think that it is working and it's working exactly the way it was designed to do so. And that's the problem. As an anthropologist, my job is to dive deep into our healthcare system and find out what is going on and what we can do about it. For my dissertation research, I completed 14 months of fieldwork with local organizations and members of Philadelphia's Latinx immigrant community. And I utilized 3 complementary ethnographic methods: participant observation, interviewing, and archival research. By analyzing the qualitative data, I was able to map out the ways that Latinx immigrant patients, medical professionals, and community activists collaborate with one another across multiple social contexts. And I found that in daily life, individuals move between all 3 of those positions in order to access care for themselves, facilitate access to care for others, or advocate for access to care as a human right for everyone, regardless of immigration or insurance status. Participants in my research share a common goal with the City Council of Philadelphia, which in 2018 passed a resolution proclaiming, and I quote, "Every person in the city of Philadelphia and across the United States, regardless of citizenship status, deserves quality healthcare." While this is Philadelphia's official position, I found that this is not the lived reality for the 50,000 undocumented immigrants living in Philadelphia. In fact, at the time in 2018, when this resolution was passed, Philadelphia's Regional Office for Immigration and Customs Enforcement was reported to be the most aggressive in the nation. ICE presence throughout the city, along with local hospitals practicing medical deportations, means that many undocumented patients use alternative pathways to access healthcare and experience roadblocks unique to them. Providers have responded to this by opening nonprofit clinics as safe alternatives for undocumented patients and by working with community activists to train medical professionals about the structural barriers immigrants experience that transcend differences in cultural backgrounds. Ultimately, patients, providers, and activists know that the medical encounter is shaped by historical, political, and social forces beyond the clinical space. As an anthropologist, I analyze how they deconstruct, navigate, and push back against those forces using networks of care in and beyond the clinic. Through this project, I'm expanding the traditional territory of medical and linguistic anthropology, but more importantly, this project provides practical insights about how we can work within, respond to, and redesign a healthcare system that works for everyone, regardless of immigration or insurance status.
Thank you so much, Grace. Wonderful presentation. It's great that our researchers are asking such tough questions and searching so hard to find solutions. So very nicely done. Thank you. We'll now hear from our next presenter, Rachel Tomlinson. She's coming to us from the College of Public Health. Focus is on kinesiology, and her presentation today is titled Get Moving, a Grounded Theory Analysis of Employees' Perceptions of the Physical Activity Participation in Workplace Wellness Programs.
So, do you ever wish that you had more time in the day to work out? Well, that's why I started researching physical activity in workplace wellness programs, because we find from previous research that employees have a decrease of about 100 calories a day within the workplace. But at the same time, the workplace is a great place to promote physical activity because of the time we spend at work and being able to bring groups together. The significance of this research is also in the public health sphere because we also know that sedentary behavior increases the likelihood of chronic health issues. So being able to increase physical activity also improves our well-being and health. So using some behavior change theories, I focus on a qualitative study to answer the research question, what are employees' perceptions concerning how their organization facilitates their participation in physical activity within the workplace wellness program to provide better outcomes for both the organization and the employee? So what we found is through interviews with 19 participants, from their experience with a workplace wellness program, though they didn't have to participate in the workplace wellness program, they had to be at a company for at least 6 months that offered a workplace wellness program. Their decision-making process really had multiple levels. They looked at 3 aspects, primarily barriers, bolsters that facilitated it, and facilitators. They also looked at across different levels of their experience, from the individual to the relational to the organizational. So you might be thinking, how can your organization support you to work out during the workday? Through the themes that were developed, I came up with 6 recommendations that could also be focused as implications for practice. These are the things that are described on the slide. Primarily, communication should occur throughout the year and in multiple different ways. The supervisors are also reluctant to give support to the staff, so providing training and specific templates to them would be helpful in facilitating those reactions. And also scheduling options that give even short bouts of time within the organization that are sponsored so that people feel comfortable to work out during the workday. Capitalizing on social connections and using that accountability and buddies within the workplace to improve physical activity. And also maintaining a culture of health so that people feel that they're supported with their wellness. And on the flip side, we really want to look at reconsider the use of monetary incentives, because they tend to start a behavior change, but in the long term, they don't always keep that behavior change. So it's really good to look at what makes the physical activity become enjoyable and in the long term. So at the end of the day, looking at the motivation and looking at these implications, companies can change their policies to improve the well-being of their individuals while also improving the bottom line for the company. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. That was great. Very interesting to hear about and motivating for all of us to think about. So thank you very much. We appreciate all your work in this area. Great. Well, to move things along, we will now hear from Juan from the School of Pharmacy, discipline in pharmaceutical sciences. And his presentation is titled Avoiding Drug Adverse Effects When Biology Meets Mathematics. So I'd like to turn the presentation over to John.
Thank you. Have you ever thought why pharmacist tells you take the drug every 8 hours? Have you thought about why your grandma always takes some bad flavored tablets without her favorite juice? Yes, I guess you may know the answer. Some calculation need to be performed to make sure the prescription are safe for the patient. Some interactions happens here between the drug and the component in juice. Both of these interactions can guide you to minimize the drug adverse effect. You may be curious about where does this calculation come from and why do we need to care about the interactions? Let's get into it. We have some special protein in our body named enzyme. They're responsible for breaking down the substance and some administered drugs. This one specific enzyme, called the CYP enzyme, is very abundant in human liver. It can break down over 60% of drugs in the market. When we put the drug and the enzyme together, guess what? Some drug can be broken down fast and others have a slower process. The speed of the process can directly determine how fast the drug level decline in patient blood and when it's the next time to take a second dose. In reality, many factors can affect how fast drugs are broken down in your body. For example, the co-administered drugs, the food you eat every day. Some of them can really make the drug break down even more slowly. If you take the drug multiple times in a short period, guess what? The drug can accumulate in your body and easily reach a toxic level. As you say, a drug can be a poison if you don't take it correctly. As a mathematician solving biology problems, we are trying to connect the performance of enzyme on drug to the performance of human body on drug in a quantitative way. For example, if we observe some drug can slow down the performance of the liver enzyme on another drug, we have to test if any drug accumulate in our bodies. Using a mathematical software, the observed interaction in a test tube can help the pharmacist determine what labels can be put in the drug bottles. Almost everyone have to take some drugs during their lives. What our mission is trying to guarantee your safety and maximize your lab quality by providing more accurate quantity. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Very interesting. Another presentation geared towards our health, which is wonderful. We appreciate your hard work. So another interesting topic. This is probably the most stimulating thing most of us will be doing all week, listening to all these great presentations and hearing how the students' research will have impact on various different parts of our lives. So this is great. Our next presenter, Xinjiama, is coming to us from the Fox School of Business, focused on business administration. Her presentation is titled, Ending on a High Note, Managerial Tone Within Earnings Conference Calls. So I'd now like to turn the presentation over to Xinjiama.
Thank you, Christina. So how many times in your life have been ever told to make a good last impression, to finish strong, or to end on a high note? A good last impression is something that sticks with people because it turned out to be the freshest in people's memory. A very simple real life example is that most people feel much better if they hear the bad news first, followed by the good news. Because in this way, they get the bad news out of the way and end on a high note. Psychologists also experiment on individuals and find that a good last impression or the final moments of an experience heavily influence people's judgment in terms of how painful the medical procedure is, how good the feedback is, or where to go for the spring breaks. Naturally, managers are also suggested by communication experts to end on a high note when interacting with their stakeholders. And that's what my dissertation is about. I look at the importance of last impressions in stock market. Why? Because it may not work as expected. When I look at the stock market reactions to managers ending on a high note, I am examining the behavior of a group of professionals. These professionals are well-educated, experienced investors who trade on the best information they can get about the stock and make profits if they react faster than others. So it is a question whether these professionals will be influenced when managers end on a high note. How do I go about it? I collect and analyze real-life data on firms' quarterly earnings conference calls and stock market reactions. I study whether managers end on a high note on average and whether investor perceptions are improved. The data tells me, indicated by the bottom left graph here, that CEOs and CFOs become much more positive in their word choices near the end of the earnings conference calls when they talk with audiences. And in fact, they are more likely to do so when firm performance is poor. So ending on a high note is being used as a way to hide bad news. Then how about the stock market participants? These investors are aware of the manager's intentions. Since they have real money at stake, they remain skeptical about the information released and are not influenced by the last impressions. Collectively, the markets react negatively when managers end on a high note. Overall, I'm not suggesting that last impression is not important, but when it applies to the setting of stock market, when we look at the behavior of a group of professionals, leaving a good last impression won't be an effective way to hide bad news. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Another interesting presentation. And talking about impression, these presenters are leaving a great impression on all of us today. Really nice work. We have another great presentation coming up. We're now going to hear from Michael Filan from the College of Engineering in Bioengineering. And Michael's presentation is titled Engineering Sight with Stem Cells. So I'd like to turn the presentation over to Michael.
Thank you. Watching your spouse as they walk down the aisle, the beauty of a sunset or the startling contrast of blooming cherry blossoms against the blue sky. These moments, forever etched into our memories, are enabled by the most powerful and most valued of all human senses, sight. But the terrifying loss of that sense looms for millions of people all over the world from dozens of convoluted diseases of the eye. Just one such form of vision loss, AMD, or age-related macular degeneration, afflicts more than 1 in 10 Americans over the age of 80. The workhorse of the eye is the retina, housing a dozen different cell types organized in an extremely complex and highly controlled architecture about the thickness of just 2 human hairs. Tissue engineers like myself use cells to rebuild human tissues in an artificial environment. But the prospect of reconstructing the living retina, perhaps the most complicated tissue in the body, is daunting. However, the key to making it work is simple. Take those special cells that can become any tissue in the body, what we call stem cells, and give them the exact environment and cues that would usually trigger them to become a retina and then get out of the way. Let nature do what it does best. My research aims to improve the materials and devices used to manufacture engineered retinal tissues. One facet of my research is to design and build new types of bioreactors, devices that optimize biological environments. My simplified 3D printable rotating bioreactor, shown on the right, exemplifies how engineers are allowing nature to do what it does best. This bioreactor produces a gentle floating environment with an abundance of food, oxygen, and just a touch of love that seeks to recreate the safe warmth the mother's womb gives a growing fetus. Microscopic images taken of cells grown in my systems, shown in the central image, confirm through their shape and architecture that we have been able to recreate the retina. The creation of engineered retinal tissues is enabled by powerful new technologies. First, starting with our patient on the left here, adult cells can be collected from a simple skin biopsy sample, then chemically converted into stem cells. Using precise protocols, materials, and equipment, such as my bioreactor, we can then drive those stem cells to change into the various organized cells of the human retina. These range from individual layers of single cells all the way up to 3D structures, perfectly reproducing the complete living retina, what we call organoids. Early evidence suggests that these tissues may be implanted back into the patient, providing a personalized treatment for vision loss, completing the cycle of tissue engineering so that we can all appreciate those cherry blossoms. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. That was excellent. Another great example of how research can help us in the future. Wonderful. Great. Well, these have all been interesting, and we still have a few more interesting ones ahead of us. So I'll ask everybody to stay focused. These are, really interesting, and we just have to be so appreciative of how much hard work our students have done. With that being said, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Abby Whitaker, who's coming to us from the College of Liberal Arts. Our discipline is history, and her presentation today is titled Sesame Street and the Making of Fuzzy Liberalism. So I'll turn the floor over to Abby. Abby, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Sunny days sweeping the clouds away, on my way to where the air is sweet. Can you tell me how to get to Sesame Street? It's really hard not to sing the opening song of one of America's most beloved children's television shows. Everyone knows Sesame Street, either from when you watched as a kid, you watch it with your kids now, or you certainly know its most beloved characters from Elmo to Big Bird. But what you might not know about Sesame Street is that it's critical to our understanding of American political history. Sesame Street premiered over 50 years ago in 1969, a critical moment when the country was in political and cultural turmoil. In the wake of the ongoing Vietnam War, the assassination of Martin Luther King, white backlash to the civil rights movement, and the election of Richard Nixon, a liberal consensus built around racial progress, social welfare, and the power of government to help people was left in ruins. As most historians argue, this was the moment that liberal politics failed. But liberal politics didn't fail, at least not completely. People were left in the late 1960s and early 70s to put together these shattered pieces of the liberal consensus and transform it into something new. Among these people were a group of producers working on a revolutionary show for kids. Sesame Street was the product of a mission to bring equitable and educational television to kids from all socioeconomic backgrounds. What the show intended to create was a research-driven program with an integrated cast that could close the achievement gap between Black and white students. But its more impactful creation, I argue, was a new brand of liberalism that I call fuzzy liberalism. Fuzzy liberalism was the politics of parents. If your child watched Sesame Street, it made you a good parent, and it signaled that you believed a certain set of values. You believed in the importance of racial diversity. You believed in teaching your child tolerance. You believed in the value of education and in the idea of equal opportunity. But fuzzy liberalism was also a performance. That's what I'm studying in this project, the moments of rupture, when the politics of fuzzy liberalism, of Sesame Street, of parents are tested. I tell this story through the history of Roosevelt Franklin, a Black Muppet removed from the show in 1976 amidst the debates about school integration, and the story of the set and what it meant to portray this idealized version of an integrated Harlem street to white kids in the suburbs, and the story of Bert and Ernie and the continued refusal to see a queer reading of their relationship. Using Sesame Street episodes, production documents, social media, and parenting blogs and magazines, I trace the production of liberal politics from the 1960s to our current moment and ask, what has Sesame Street really been teaching us all of these years? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abby. What an interesting way to look at something seemingly simple and yet asking such great questions and posing it in a way that's so interesting to listen to. Another great presentation. I think the judges are really going to have their work cut out for them today, trying to figure out how to award the top presenters. Everyone's doing such a great job. With that being said, I'd like to now introduce our next presenter, Jay Podell, who's coming from the College of Science and Technology. His discipline is physics, and his presentation is titled Magnetism for the Non-Magnetic Materials Interface for Future Generation Electronic Devices. So we'd like to turn it over to Jay if you're ready.
Thank you, Christina, for such nice introduction. So when I was a child, I used to play with magnets, broken magnets from television and radio, and that was quite fun. But more than that, nowadays I am enjoying the research because I am doing the research on magnetism and magnetic materials. And this is really interesting because this is the game changer of electronic devices. If you go back to the history of past, at the birth of computer, they were of the size of a room. But nowadays, single computer can be occupied in our bag and pockets. So that is very interesting. And they are much more powerful than the previous devices. And the race of technological development is not over yet. We want to improve the performance and memory storage capacity of these devices. And also we want to decrease the size of these devices depending on our needs. And that is a physicist, our duty is to find the new materials for this kind of devices. And my materials is related to the two non-magnetic materials when they are touched together to form a multi-layer like this. And then at the junction between them, there will be the interesting thing happens, means magnetism appears from the non-magnetic materials. And that's the new phenomena that we developed. And my project is related to two work. One is how much the thickness of that magnetic layer, and another is how to control that magnetism at the interface for the potential application of future generation electronic devices. And we are going to use the X-ray technique. When you go to the hospital, physician orders the X-ray and examine your body. Similar to that, as a physicist, we do the X-ray of the samples and observe what's going on inside the samples. But we cannot go to the hospital to do the X-ray. So we have to travel around the world for the national and international lab, and we do the X-ray for our sample and examines what's going on inside our sample. And on the top right panel, you can see that the red line strip, that is the magnetism developed at the interface. You can see two materials joined together, and at the interface, there is magnetism. And if you imagine how much thinner is this, we quantified, and you will know soon. And that quantified thickness of magnetism at the interface is 100,000 times smaller than our human hair. Can you imagine that much thinner things to have the industrial application, and what will be our next generation electronic devices? Yes, and this is even 12 times smaller than the next generation magnetic recording media. So this is not for the next, but next to next. And my next project is how to control this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you so much for explaining that. And it's great to see your passion for this topic. Another great presentation. We have one more presentation today. We are going to hear from Naja Orr. Naja is coming from the Fox School of Business, Business Administration, and his presentation is titled Social Impact Program Evaluation. So I'd like to turn the presentation over to Naja, if you're ready.
Thank you, Christina, and good afternoon. My research is focusing on social impact program evaluation. The motivation for my research stems from inadequate public funding, oftentimes straining social service agencies' ability to fulfill all of their agency and consumer needs. And funders now expect demonstrated benefit to the community and a return on investment. So this led to my research question: will theory-based program evaluation demonstrate improved program impact and processes and results during development of the evaluation tool when stakeholders are involved versus when stakeholders are omitted? The methodology and data collection will include action research, where I'm looking to learn from the intervention from organizations and then use that learning to benefit others. Mixed methodology, qualitative and quantitative, and then semi-structured interviews with the collection of data and notes. The research design and rigor will be established by utilizing the support from 3 social service agencies that provide supports to older adults as their target population. The 3 agencies will use 3 different stakeholder groups for 3 programs evaluated. The stakeholder groups will each consist of a different composition of stakeholders: staff-led, stakeholder-led, and expert-led. This social impact program evaluation blueprint will consist of 4 components: the theory of change, first starting with the long-term goals and working your way backwards, connecting the program activities and outcomes with the long-term goals. Then the logic model, mapping the respective metrics with the long-term goals, moving from your inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and impact. linear impact measurement, and analysis connecting the outcomes with the intrinsic value created or monetizing the intrinsic value, and then the social return on investment. Utilizing stakeholders throughout the process to compare perceived value of social benefits to actual costs. My proposed outcome, I believe this proposed blueprint will show a material difference in the process and results with the use of stakeholders versus the omission of stakeholders in the program evaluation process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Naja. That was great. Wonderful presentations today. I know I keep repeating myself, but really impressive work. Thank you so much for sharing your passion and your research with us. It's really been interesting to hear about all of the different types of topics you've been working on. There's a wide range here, and we've all just enjoyed so much hearing you take all of your hard work and communicate it to us in simply 3 minutes. If you think about it, if any of us were asked to communicate the last few years of our life in just 3 minutes, it would be pretty hard to do. And our students are communicating these complicated topics in a way that a broad audience like all of us can appreciate. And so we just have to thank them for that and appreciate the hard work and all the energy and passion that they've put into these topics. So thank you very much, presenters. Excellent work today. I know you've worked so hard. And with that, I'd like to turn our program back over to our host, Mark, who's going to walk us through how the judging will happen today. So Mark, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Christina. And also just want to thank you as our moderator for taking us through each of those presentations. And I agree with you, our judges definitely have some difficult work ahead of them, being able to select a first prize award winner, as well as a second prize award winner out of this particular group. And I think also to our attendees, you also have a choice to make, and we want to invite you to be a part of this particular process of being able to pick a People's Choice Award winner. So this is the presentation that we all as the attendees thought was the best and want to actually invite you into this particular process. So please remember the judging criteria that we talked about at the very beginning, the comprehension and content, as well as the engagement and in communication. Keep that in mind as you are making your choice, but you will actually be receiving a survey link from a member of our planning committee. Megan Nyquist will be sending that out very soon. And you can actually go to that survey and you can actually make your selection for the presentation that you thought was the most outstanding. So that will be being sent out very soon. And we will give you a minute or so to be able to complete that. And we'll kind of get ready to transition into our debrief activity. For our judges, our 4 judges, we invite you to go to the separate room to be able to deliberate between the first and the second prize award winners. So if you have your link, you can actually go to that separate room to begin that particular process. We'll try to keep that at about 10, maybe 15 minutes of deliberation, and then we'll come back and we'll be able to hear who our award winners are today. But this has been really such an amazing event. And many of us that you'll get to see later have been a part of the planning committee. There has been a planning committee for the last couple of months. We had a general orientation meeting for the 3-minute thesis competition, as well as some mock presentations. And a number of us were just kind of commenting on just how amazing the presentations are. We saw many of these presentations in March, and to see the improvement, to see the growth, we were just blown away. So grateful to have been able to participate and be able to see each of our presenters work over this particular time period. So really amazing job to all of our presenters. And hopefully this link is going out now to be able to begin with the judging process. So we are inviting you all to do that. And what I'm going to do now is we are going to get ready to transition to our debrief activity. And I'd like to actually introduce again our facilitator. So I will get ready to do that here. And so our debrief activity is going to be facilitated by Dr. Crystal Austin, again, who is an assistant professor of instruction in the College of Education and Human Development, actually works within the counseling psychology program. And she's going to just have a brief dialogue with our presenters, just hearing a little bit about their particular process in preparing these presentations, maybe offer a little bit of advice and encouragement in terms of mental well-being for our graduate students. I know that that is always top of mind for many of our students, as well as administrators and faculty. So I will now hand it over to Crystal to be able to interact with our group. And also panelists, students, presenters, you can actually show your screen and you can actually unmute yourselves as we kind of get into this debrief activity here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. Hello, everyone. My name is Crystal Austin. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. It is a pleasure to be with you all this afternoon. And I'm still really sort of wrapping my mind around all I got to listen to and learn about from the presenters today. Congratulations to all of you for truly a wonderful job. And I know that all of you have been preparing for this for quite some time, not only preparing for the 3-minute thesis, but in the work that you've been doing for years and years. So as a former doctoral student, someone who's defended a dissertation and presented research in places, I encourage you all in this moment, if you haven't yet done so after your presentation, to just take a deep breath and congratulate yourselves on a wonderful job done. Truly, truly wonderful. So actually, let's get started with what will be, quite informal. If folks need to take a break, to use the restroom, grab some water, if we were doing this in person, there would likely be some light refreshments around and we would have opportunity to gather in those ways as well. And so I encourage you always to take care of your needs throughout this conversation as we kind of informally discuss your process and share with those of you in the audience, the folks in the audience who through the chat have expressed lots of warm words of congratulations and excitement about your work. So my first question is, and I'm not sure if I will have the capacity to see the hand raise function. And so I'll invite folks to attempt to do that. And if not, to just unmute and share or indicate to me, signaling in some way that you'd like to respond. My first question is, let's talk about what was most rewarding or exciting about preparing for the 3MT competition.
Well, thank you everyone for the opportunity. I think it was an incredibly rewarding experience and really, really useful to just like sit down and try to distill like very clearly. I'm not someone whose like mind operates at a very clear level. And so, writing introductions, writing those first paragraphs are always the hardest part. So to really have to be succinct and try to capture everything in 3 minutes was challenging, but it was so helpful and it helped me move forward with my own research with like a new sense of clarity.
Thanks, Abby. Yeah, the opportunity to really condense something that you have thought about and written about for much longer periods of time to 3 minutes in a way that is easily communicated to folks who haven't been as immersed in your world as you and others in your direct field have been. Is really cool. In career counseling, we'll refer to things like that. You might be familiar with the idea of the elevator pitch, how you would describe yourself or the work that you've done in the time that it takes to enter an elevator with someone, and by the time that they leave, do they have enough information about who you are or what you do? And so we encourage folks to practice that, and it feels like this is sort of similar. Other folks want to share? Justin, I see your hand.
Hey. So I'm actually a bit of a chatterbox, to tell the truth. I'll talk and talk and talk some more, and people will try to leave, and I'll talk to them as they're leaving. But so yes, it was actually very useful in trying to, as she said, distill things down, become more succinct, which is certainly a challenge for people like me. But actually, there's a practical spin-off benefit. So I actually spent probably more time on that slide and the somewhat cartoonish chart in there than I did on a lot of actual slides that are being submitted to papers. Now you think, oh, that's not a good thing. It actually is, because the first version that I came up with for that originally was supposed to be kind of this timeline of the lifetime of the cell, and it would have the various charts, which were essentially basically a giant amalgamated super chart. Way too much data in the end. Obviously it was removed, but that found another life because I'm actually using that as part of my dissertation now. So it did, there's all this experimenting with new charts, experimenting with new slides. had practical spin-offs for me that will, very practically be put right into my dissertation. So even the failed stuff that didn't end up in the final slide was quite useful. So the entire process itself, while a bit troublesome and certainly unusual for people like me, was, it was useful. Also, I've talked about my research with my parents before, who are both humanities professors. So not exactly their area of expertise, so they try. And most of the time I could get across what I was talking about, but it would take like 20 minutes or something like that, because I'd go off on a tangent about, differentiation expression of genes, and lifetime of cells and matrix maturation, all this stuff. And it would go on because I figured, you need to understand all of this foundational stuff in order to understand what I'm talking about. So I had never come close to distilling anything, even like a third of my work in 3 minutes before. So yeah, quite a learning experience, this whole endeavor.
So glad to hear that, Justin. As each of you were presenting, I pictured you on different news shows or kinds of science media sorts of shows or podcasts, things like that. And I think that something like this, especially on the news, a lot of the news shows we watch where a guest speaker or an expert on something will only have such a limited window of time to communicate something that's their life's work. I think it's amazing. And I can imagine each of you doing that really successfully. So get ready for fame. Naja, I saw your hand earlier.
Yes, I think the last 2 points that you made actually hit the nail on the head for me. I think I've been a firm believer for many years on elevator speeches. And, I think everyone's passion surely came out. It was evident today in how everyone presented, but then to be able to take all of the time and energy and effort that you put into, a lot of research over the last months or year plus, and then condense that down to 3 minutes is certainly a challenge. I know, it took me a while to condense and then get it down to that 3 minutes and then a little bit under. So, commend everyone. I've really thoroughly enjoyed everyone's presentations.
Thank you, Naja. Anyone else want to share something that stood out to them about their process? Or there's something that was something incredibly rewarding about it, a challenge, a surprise about something that you learned in terms of ways to communicate your work, or something that you learned about yourself in the process of preparing?
So it was funny because I defended my dissertation and one of my questions was, what's your elevator pitch? And I was like, wait, I have a slide with 6 interventions, which I already talked about, but bringing it into these words. And even for me, workplace wellness is something that's we don't have very specific words. But in the mock, they were like, oh, you used intrinsic versus extrinsic. We don't know what that means, so I changed it to just behavior change, and what that means. It made it helpful to explain it to other people. So I thought that piece was useful as well.
Thanks, Rachel, and congratulations on your dissertation defense.
Thanks.
Melissa, I saw your hand.
Yeah, just piggybacking off of that idea, that I was going to say that the biggest takeaway that I had from doing this and really sitting down and condensing my research is identifying what jargon that we're so used to using we don't even think about anymore. And that was a really interesting experience where it was like, microorganisms or chemosynthetic, what have you. And it's like, no one knows what that means. I had to, really identify what jargon I just, internalize at this point. So that was interesting for me to experience.
I understood snails, so I appreciate that.
I did too.
Yes, gastropods I chose to take out.
I really appreciate that about the spirit of 3MT overall is giving us the opportunity to reflect on the work that we do in meaningful ways and to communicate it not taking away from the magnitude or the importance of the content, but shifting it or reframing it so that the important information that you've learned and the data that you've collected will be able to reach larger audiences. So Rachel, you mentioned the mock competition. For those of you who participated in the opportunity to do the mock competition and get some feedback, would you like to speak about that process? So what it was like to integrate some of the feedback that you received?
So the one piece of feedback I remember receiving, and I even took notes down as I was hearing it, was connecting my research to like a practical thing, to why is this important to you? And I had never really thought about that. I think it kind of falls in line with some of the other conversation about, what does my dissertation do? Like we all just write it because you have to do this thing, but in the end, how does that, what happens afterwards, I guess? And I never thought about that until somebody asked me, so I guess they're like, so what's the big deal? How does this affect me? So then I took some time to think through that and hopefully tweak the presentation to bring in and show some relevant examples that might affect a lot of people. So that was helpful for me. I'd never really thought about it.
Thank you. Yeah, I observed and heard each of you doing that in different ways, answering that question of why does this matter? How does this matter to us individually, collectively? What will this mean moving forward? Anyone else want to share something they took away from the mock interview experience? Rachel?
So I didn't actually know it was a mock interview when I logged in, so that created some stress. But one of the biggest things that they talked to me about was being conversational, and I didn't know what that meant. And I have to give a shout out. I don't think she's here, but Associate Dean Ibrahim from Public Health met with me, and we went over my presentation, and she's like, "These are the things that I'm hearing that make sense, and these are the things that don't make sense. Now talk to me about it. Don't give me a research presentation." And I was like, oh yeah, last week I gave you, the big research presentation, but this was more, how do we talk about it? How do we engage people? And especially in Zoom, outside yourself. And also, where do I look? Because I still always look at the wrong place.
I can't, yes, that is a question I still have as well. After I don't want to count how many hours on Zoom teaching for the last year and change. Anyone else want to share about your process, perhaps of preparing for this via Zoom?
I guess I could just, does anybody else have their hand up? I was just going to say, I was grateful. Abby and I are from the College of Liberal Arts, and we had a College of Liberal Arts session, and the individuals that were there gave us a lot of feedback about background and appearance and how to position ourselves on Zoom. And that was really, really helpful because I wasn't focused on that. I was really focused on working on the presentation itself and not so much the Zoom aspect of it. So having the feedback from others was really, really great. And I'm very grateful that other people took the time out of their busy schedule to do that and to give us the feedback and support. So that was where I mostly took my advice, was from those in the CLA.
Yeah, thank you so much, Grace, for sharing. And I have been surprised and appreciative throughout this year of all of the ways in which I have been able to connect with folks and experience the energy that you all have. And today was a wonderful example of that via Zoom in ways that I did not anticipate a year and change ago. And so that's been a really meaningful experience, I think, something to take away from these virtual gatherings, connections, presentations. Michael?
Yeah, definitely accommodating for Zoom was something to think about. I had the opportunity to practice a couple times in front of friends and family just to make sure I was speaking correctly. And I got some really interesting feedback, one of which was I talk with my hands a lot, and that doesn't necessarily communicate itself so well when you're a square yay big on the side. So learning to adapt around that and not make the gestures a critical part of how you speak. And then also finding out that I have a tendency to mumble, so being extremely careful to articulate the words because the microphone can really mash everything together and make sure your voice isn't heard as well.
Can I hop in really quickly? And I'm so glad that we asked the psychologist to facilitate this discussion. I think it seems really great, everyone sharing here. So we actually have our first prize award winner as well as our second prize award winner. We have that decided. But we're actually going to resend the People's Choice Award survey because it seemed as though some people had trouble with some access getting to that particular Google survey. So for all of our attendees, if you would be so kind to actually go back to the survey and to submit your choice for our People's Choice, we just want to make sure that we can actually get everyone to be able to submit. So you can continue on with the dialogue. We're almost there, but we just want to make sure we do the People's Choice once more, just another collection. So thank you all. We'll be back in just a little bit.
Thanks, Mark. Yes, thank you, Michael. As you were speaking, Michael, I was thinking about just all of the ways in which our capacity for presenting and sharing information with folks all over the globe has expanded in this last year, during which there has been an immense amount of loss and tragedy and lots of not easy things. I'm appreciative of the ways in which we as people have reconceptualized what it means to connect, and our capacity for doing so has expanded. For me, that's meant inviting guest speakers from folks who wouldn't have been able to make it to campus to join my classes to speak with folks. It's meant connecting with friends and family and loved ones in places in ways that I hadn't before. And it's been connecting with wonderful students and people doing amazing research all over the place. And so I'm excited for the skills that you've learned and how you've communicated those skills and how you will absolutely continue to use them in our even more globalized world moving forward, I believe. So I am curious for folks who are for audience members, if participants have advice or words of encouragement about folks who may participate in 3MT in the future. Grace?
Well, I would say the one piece of advice is to look for examples in your field. I was looking at a lot of 3MT competitions and I was struggling to find some in anthropology, but I was fortunate to see at our association, they had some examples posted. And I found out that in the last couple of annual conferences, they've been doing them, where graduating anthropologists can do this at the national conference. And so I'm going to submit this year with this presentation, but I was able to find a lot of really good examples. And I think that would be my first piece of advice, is just to try, if possible, to find examples from within your specific discipline and look at how people who are working on similar things present their information.
That's great advice. Thank you. Yeah. Others? Perhaps why you might encourage someone or what advice you'd give, Melissa?
This is just some advice I would give, going off of what I said with the jargon. I would, if you're preparing for a 3-minute thesis, I would definitely find somebody in your family or a friend who is not in your field and give your presentation, your first draft of your presentation to them, because they are going to be able to tell you exactly what confused them, what they didn't understand. And right, that's the audience that you're trying to reach. So that's the advice I would give, is find somebody outside of your discipline to practice on first.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with that for sure. The practice is so important, and getting feedback and integrating feedback from multiple, I think, perspectives is also really valuable. One thing that I'm curious about in terms of going back to the differences between a virtual presentation versus if we were in a lecture hall size space or larger is not having the capacity to pick up on nonverbals of audience members or the energy of the physical space, which is something that I've noticed in the past year in doing presentations and in teaching. Does anyone want to speak to what that was like for you, Justin?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So teaching classes before and after virtual learning, before and after COVID. So I don't know about a lot of other teachers. So bioengineering is a fairly technical lecture-based field. My fiance teaches Japanese, and she's basically been unable to do an entirely virtual Japanese course because she relies so heavily on participation and reading the room. But it's true in bioengineering as well. We can manage virtually, but you're very used to, even when you're just lecturing for 40 minutes, you're used to reading the room, seeing, you know, who's paying attention, who's looking down, who's looking up, who's keeping notes and who's not. You know, sometimes you might interject a joke or two to liven things up, or mostly just to recapture people's attention, things of that nature. But those sorts of tricks aren't really quite as useful virtually, especially because generally speaking, you won't have access to the entire class. I mean, at one point, I later learned to dual screen it so that I would have the entire class up on one screen while the lecture is up on the other. That kind of helps to an extent, but many students will just go incognito and then you won't be able to see them at all. Some professors I know say everyone has to be visible. No one can turn off their video. I wasn't quite so strict about that, but I could see why they would do that because yes, audience input, nonverbal cues are absolutely essential for when you're talking to people, whether that's a group of 3 people or whether it's the largest groups of 100, 200 people. Probably the largest lecture I ever gave was maybe about 350 people cramped into one very large hall. And even then, you still rely on the nonverbal cues, even en masse. You're able to process this by getting the mood of the room on a rather instinctive level, and it'll change your tone, it'll change your speaking cadence, it'll change how loudly you speak or how softly you speak and what words you stress and what don't word. So all of these are essential components to communication, and all of these are essentially handicapped by the virtual format. So I can imagine it's very different, even for some people just being able to pace back and forth when they're talking about their topic, like many people do on TED Talks or the 3MTs that you'll read online. Pacing is a well-known thing for relaxing someone's ability. Just moving around, in fact, has often relaxing effect on people that can make it easier to talk about a topic. And you can't do that while you're rooted here. You know, I see John, I believe, actually stood up and did his, right, John? Yeah. So he, I think, was the one. And I thought when he did that, oh, that's quite clever. I thought, so if I can speak a little bit about that, when you did the standing up trick, I immediately thought, oh, I wonder if I could do that as well. I thought centering the camera is a little difficult, but it was a good idea if you can get a proper background for it. I don't have a proper background that would allow me to do it here, but if you have a straight blank wall or a green screen or something like that, that's actually a quite clever move, and then that allows you to do more moving around, back and forth, gesturing to things. Good compromise, if you can stand for 40 minutes.
Thank you for that, Dustin. So something that Christina mentioned earlier, and I just want to echo before we wrap up this conversation is, and this ties into what you're saying, Dustin, the energy piece of it just feels different when we're meeting in person. And so all of you have captured that virtually in your presentations today. And so truly congratulations on that, and thank you for that. And I also want to remind you again, this is perhaps the counselor in me, to give yourselves some breaks from screens, stretching, moving around, maybe not while you're presenting or on screen, perhaps, if that isn't an option, but we all need to do more of that, especially these days. Thank you all for the really wonderful conversation, for sharing your perspectives, experiences, feedback, and words of wisdom for future folks who will be involved in the 3MT. It seems like we've got some announcements.
We do have some announcements, and thank you all for this wonderful debrief, and thank you, Dr. Austin, for facilitating this conversation. I do want to say, hopefully, that our presenters can stay to the end. Just wanted to be able to connect with you all. And wow, this really, I think, has been a very difficult choice, maybe for our judges as well as the People's Choice. All the presentations were excellent. It was so great to be able to see you all present. But I can now share with you all who our winners are for today. And here are our winners for today. So first place award winner is Michael Filan from the College of Engineering, Bioengineering. And then our second place award winner is Melissa Betters from the College of Science and Technology with a focus in biology. And the People's Choice Award winner is Podell from the College of Science and Technology in Physics. So these are award winners. Can we give a round of applause? Congratulations to those who have won. And this will be a scholarship that is issued out from the graduate school, and you will receive information about that afterward. Again, we thank the sponsorship from the graduate school for that. So these are winners, but also just a congratulations and thank you to all of our presenters today. Really excellent presentations, everyone. Also want to thank our moderator, Christina Owings, for facilitating the different presentations. We really appreciate that so much. And then also, I would like to share that this has been a process that has been underway since December in terms of planning for this university-wide competition. And there have been several committee members that have been a part of this particular process, and I wanted to acknowledge them all here. So we have Dr. Sean Scher, the Associate Vice Provost from the graduate school. We also have Megan Nyquist, who is the enrollment coordinator from the College of Science and Technology. We also have Mia Nardone, who is the administrative department coordinator from the Klein College of Media and Communication. You all know Christina Owings, who is an assistant professor of practice for the Fox School of Business. Teresa White, who is a senior academic advisor in the College of Public Health. We also have Joseph Parrish, assistant professor of instruction, also in the College of Education and Human Development. Crystal Alston, who you all got a chance to meet, assistant professor of instruction in the College of Education and Human Development. And then lastly, myself have been a part of this particular committee. And we are looking forward to seeing this happen in future years for other students. So again, this debrief has been really helpful. Thank you all for sharing insights on what we can do kind of going forward. We really hope that this will stay here at Temple University. So again, many thanks to, again, all these sponsors that we've had for this particular program. Thank you to our winners who have won this particular competition. We're grateful for you as well. And this is everything. Thank you to our attendees for sticking around for, I think it was an hour and a half of all this content. And this is all made possible by the 3-minute thesis competition founded by the University of Queensland. This is where it came from. So we owe thanks to them. But we thank everyone for participating today and take care. It's been a wonderful day.